You could hear the hospital long before you could see it. A bright corridor full of shoes squeaking on polished floors and voices rising with urgency, the heartbeat of a building that had seen every form of fear and faith. Jacob Bennet staggered through those doors with his little girl in his arms and felt all the noise turn into a tunnel around him. Emily's cheek rested against his shoulder and her eyes were open but far away, as if she were looking at something only she could see. He kept saying her name as if names were ropes that could pull you back from the places pain drags you, and he did not realize he was shouting until a nurse with warm brown eyes met him at the triage desk and put her hand on his elbow and said, "It is okay, sir, we've got you." They carried Emily onto a gurney and Jacob tried to set her down as gently as he had placed her in her crib the day she came home from the hospital 9 years earlier. A monitor beeped in little green mountains that comforted him and terrified him at the same time. Emily's lips were pale and dry. She looked at him and tried to smile the way she always did when she was braver than her father. "I am okay, Daddy," she whispered, and the lie landed like a stone on his chest because some lies are love in disguise. A resident with a careful voice asked questions about the last 24 hours and Jacob answered in bursts that tumbled over each other. The fever had spiked after midnight. She had complained of a dull ache in her lower belly a few days before and then a sharper pain that made her wince when she tried to sit up. In the morning she could not keep water down. He had touched her forehead and felt the heat of a small sun. He had checked her breathing the way he used to check his patients when he was still an EMT, back before layoffs and the second job and the nights where he fell asleep in his work boots. The nurse placed a cool cloth on Emily's forehead and called out orders that sounded like a language made of hope. An older doctor with silver at his temples introduced himself as Dr. Alvarez and nodded to Jacob in the way people do when they have stood beside many fathers and seen the same storm. "We will run labs and an ultrasound and we will control her pain." Then he leaned down so Emily could see his smile. "You are the boss," he told her. "If anything hurts more than a 7 out of 10 you tell us and we will fix that." Emily managed to lift 2 fingers and say, "It is only a 2, sir," because she knew adults feared numbers even more than they feared the truth. They wheeled her away and Jacob walked beside the bed gripping the rail. The ultrasound room was dim and kind, a little sea cave beneath the bright world. A technician named Alicia moved the wand with the care of someone lifting a sleeping bird. The screen flickered with shades of gray and secret shapes. Jacob remembered all the nights he had watched heart monitors in the back of an ambulance and how screens can look like magic and verdicts at the same time. Alicia frowned in concentration, then softened her face for Emily's sake. "I am seeing something that explains the pain," she said. "It might be an ovarian torsion or a mass. We will let the doctor look." Jacob felt the floor tilt under him and he put his hand on the side of the machine to steady himself. He knew the word torsion and it did not frighten him as much as the word mass. Back in the room the nurse started an IV and hung a bag that looked like a small planet. Dr. Alvarez returned with a printout from radiology and a tone that balanced gravity and reassurance. He pulled a chair beside the bed so he could speak to Emily at eye level. "You have something called a teratoma," he said. "It is a type of tumor that grows from germ cells and it can contain different tissues. It is usually benign in children. Sometimes it twists the ovary and causes pain. We believe that is what happened and that is why you feel so sick. We need to take you to surgery to remove it and untwist the ovary." Emily blinked as if she were trying to memorize the doctor's face, then looked at her father. "Is a teratoma a monster?" she asked, trying to make a joke out of a word that sounded like a city from a scary movie. Jacob tried to smile and his mouth barely obeyed. It is just a thing you outgrow, he said. A thing we will kick out of your body so fast it will forget your name. Dr. Alvarez nodded and said exactly that, and he explained the risks in a calm voice that made the word risk feel like a hill rather than a cliff. Consent forms appeared and the letters swam. Jacob signed and his hand shook. He remembered Emily at 6 learning to ride a bike in the church parking lot, wobbling in the wide circle of his arms. He remembered her saying, "Do not let go until I tell you," and he had kept his hand on the back of the seat long after she was pedaling on her own. He looked at her now, so small in a sea of sheets, and thought of every time he had let go too soon because work called or bills shouted. He made a quiet promise that if the universe gave him another ordinary Saturday he would waste it all on pancake batter and chalk drawings on the sidewalk. A young chaplain stopped by with the senses of a person who knows when rooms need silence and when they need prayer. She asked if anyone wanted to breathe together for a minute. Jacob nodded. Emily closed her eyes and tried to match the chaplain's pace, in through the nose like smelling cookies and out through the mouth like blowing out birthday candles. The window showed the hospital garden where volunteers had already planted spring tulips. Jacob imagined Emily walking there in a week in a flimsy hospital gown and fuzzy socks, laughing at how the tulips looked like cartoons of themselves. They took her to the operating room in a parade of care. The anesthesiologist had kind eyes and a voice like warm tea. He told Emily he would count with her and she could stop whenever she felt like floating. She made it to 8 and went still. Jacob stood very straight because he had learned that if you kept your shoulders squared the world sometimes believed you. A nurse placed a hand on his forearm and said, "We will take care of your daughter like she is ours." When the doors closed he felt his knees threaten to give out and he found a chair in the waiting area and stared at a wall clock that refused to move. Waiting time has its own weather. It winds itself around the mind until a minute lasts 3 lives. Jacob watched families drift and collide. A teenage boy held a cup of coffee for his mother as if it were made of gold. A man in a suit argued softly on the phone about a contract while his eyes kept jumping to the hallway where a stretcher might appear. A woman with a braid running down her back offered Jacob a granola bar with the quiet kindness of someone who has been held together by the smallest gestures. He took it and could not make himself eat it. He texted his sister who lived 2 states away and she responded with 100 hearts and a promise to light a candle. He thought of Emily's mother and the way grief had carved its canyon through their marriage, leaving them separate shores that still faced the same river. He considered calling her and then remembered she would answer even if he had not called in a year because Emily was the language they still shared. 2 hours became 3 and then the doors swung open and Dr. Alvarez appeared with the face of a man carrying both news and relief. He sat again at Jacob's level because he had that habit and said the tumor was larger than expected. About the size of a small grapefruit, but it was well encapsulated and we were able to remove it entirely. The ovary had twisted but we untwisted it and it pinked up, which is a very good sign. We will send the mass to pathology. Right now she is in recovery. She did beautifully. Jacob exhaled a breath that had lived inside him since sunrise. He closed his eyes and felt the pure physical relief pass through him like rain after a drought. In the recovery room Emily slept with her mouth a little open, her hair a messy halo on the pillow. Machines traced her life in gentle lines. Jacob sat beside her and let his hand rest near hers without touching because he had learned from the nurses that sleeping bodies need permission to wake. The nurse, whose name tag read Mei Lin, adjusted a blanket and whispered, "She is very brave. Children teach us how to be here." Jacob thought of all the times he had rushed the present because the future had set a timer. He decided that for the next 24 hours and maybe for the next 24 years he would try to live in rooms where clocks were just decorations. Emily woke in stages, eyes first, then a wrinkling of the nose as if she smelled her favorite cookies. She turned her head and found her father and gave him a crooked smile that was the exact same smile she had the day she lost her first tooth. "Did we win?" she asked, voice raspy. "We did," he said. She lifted her hand and he slipped his fingers between hers, both of them surprised by how perfectly hands can still fit after years of growing. He told her about the brave team and the grapefruit-sized villain and how her ovary was a champion that decided to glow again. She laughed weakly and said, "I always knew my insides were glitter." Mei Lin chuckled and told her she could have ice chips and maybe a popsicle later if she promised to keep breathing slow and steady. By afternoon they moved her to a room that looked out over the city. Jacob sat by the window while Emily slept and watched a storm roll in from the river, a gray curtain sweeping west to east. The hospital garden bent and then held. A volunteer came by with a therapy dog named Scout and asked if Emily might like a visit later. Jacob said yes and felt the word like another small brick laid in the road back to ordinary life. The chaplain returned and this time she asked if Jacob wanted to talk about anything that fear had dug up. He told her he had been an EMT once and how medicine had been his first language and then he had lost the job and the story he told himself about being useful. He told her he had tried to be two parents at the same time and sometimes failed at being even half of one. She listened without the hurry that often hides behind advice. She said, "You do not have to be perfect to be a miracle in someone's life. You just have to stay." He nodded and thought about how staying is the most courageous verb. Evening arrived with the smell of chicken soup from the cafeteria and the sound of a distant lullaby from the pediatric ward. Emily woke again and asked for a story. He asked what kind and she said the true kind, the kind with mistakes and a happy ending that is earned. So he told her about the day she was born and how he had been so terrified to hold her that the nurse had laughed and said she had seen quarterbacks tremble worse. He told her about the time she insisted on wearing snow boots to kindergarten in September because they made her feel powerful and how the teacher had turned it into a lesson about weather and autonomy. He told her about the night her mother left and how the house had sounded like an empty theater and how she had crawled into his bed with a flashlight and read him the book about a bear who got lost and found his way home. Emily listened with her eyes shining. She said, "I do not remember the bear part." He said, "You were the bear and I was the forest." Pathology results took 2 days. The hospital became a small town where everyone knew Emily by the stickers on her IV pole and her habit of asking the phlebotomist about her day. Scout visited twice and snored while Emily gently petted his ears. A music therapist brought a tiny keyboard and they made up a song about brave ovaries that made the respiratory therapist laugh so hard he had to wipe his glasses. Nurses taught Jacob how to measure output and write down numbers in a little notebook like a ledger of victory. He texted school and the principal recorded a video of Emily's class sending hearts from their lunch tables. At night Jacob sat by the window and watched the city change colors and felt the shape of gratitude like a new muscle he wanted to keep exercising. When the results finally arrived, Dr. Alvarez walked in with a grin that told the story before the words did. "Benign," he said. "Completely benign. No evidence of spread. Follow-up scans and routine checkups and a return to soccer when the incision heals." The room sighed. Jacob stood and shook the doctor's hand with both of his and then pulled him into a hug that surprised them both. Emily cried and then laughed because she was crying. She asked if she could have pancakes when she got home, and Jacob said he would make a stack taller than the dog. Discharge day felt like the last day of school and Christmas morning at once. The nurse removed the IV with the ceremony of untying a ribbon. Emily put on the sweatshirt Aunt Casey had mailed from Ohio with glitter letters that read "Brave is my superpower." They rode the elevator down, and Jacob caught their reflection in the polished doors and saw a father who looked older and lighter and a child who looked the same and brand new. Outside the air was cool and smelled like rain-washed concrete. The city carried on around them, strangers arguing about parking and a woman singing to her toddler on the bus bench and a bike courier slicing through traffic with the focus of a dancer. Jacob opened the passenger door and helped Emily in as if she were made of glass and steel at the same time. At home the apartment looked smaller because love takes up space. Jacob fluffed pillows on the couch and made a nest. He set a stack of books beside her and a bell she could ring if she needed anything, even though he planned to sit within arm's reach. He burned pancakes and then made better ones. He texted her mother and they set differences aside like coats you do not need on a warm day. The first night Emily fell asleep halfway through a movie and Jacob watched the soft rise and fall of her breath and thought about all the breaths he had taken for granted. He went to the window and looked out at their block, at the bodega with its neon hum and the laundromat with its spinning stars and the streetlight that always flickered at 2 in the morning. The ordinary world glowed with the kind of holiness you only notice after you have walked through a valley. Weeks later Emily walked back into school to a chorus of squeals and a banner that said "Welcome back, Em." She put her hand in her father's for an extra second before letting go, and he felt that gentle release like a blessing. At dinner she told him that sometimes she felt scared that the monster might come back, and he told her that fear is like weather. It passes and you can carry an umbrella. They made a list of umbrellas. Laughter, music, pancakes for dinner, calling Aunt Casey, walking Scout in the park when he was off duty. She said "and you," and he said "me," and they both pretended it was no big deal that they had named each other first. Spring ripened into summer and the scar on Emily's belly turned from angry pink to a soft pale line that looked like a comet's path. She touched it sometimes as if memorizing the shape of what she had survived. Jacob picked up extra shifts driving for a medical transport company, and sometimes on long quiet rides he would think about the waiting room clock and the chaplain's words and the way staying had changed the architecture of his days. He started writing again in the little journal he kept by the bed, just a few lines each night about one true thing he had noticed. The rhythm of her sleep, or the sound of rain in the alley, or the way a nurse had stuck her head into the room just to say hi even when she was off the clock. Gratitude, when practiced, multiplies like lilacs. On a golden Sunday they went to the hospital garden to visit the tulips Emily had missed. She walked slowly, holding Jacob's hand not because she needed to but because she liked the ritual of it. Mei Lin happened to be working and spotted them from the glass doors. She came out and hugged Emily and told her the bed she had used had now been used by 3 other brave kids and that the IV pole had a new sticker because Emily had started a trend. They took a picture beside the tulips and Jacob looked at the image and saw how fear can make faces look older and how love can erase years in an instant. That night Emily asked if he could tell her the story again. Which part, he asked. All of it, she said. The true kind. So he began where all true stories begin, with the moment you think you cannot bear what you were forced to carry and then you discover the strength you did not know you had. He told her about alarms and gentle hands and a tumor with a silly name and a doctor who smiled even when delivering facts that shook the earth. He told her about a father who learned that courage is not loud and dramatic, that sometimes it is a chair beside a bed and a notebook full of numbers and a promise that you will still be there in the morning. He told her about a little girl who asked if a teratoma was a monster and then taught everyone how to laugh at the dark. And when he finished, she leaned against him and said, "Let's write it down one day, so other families who are scared in bright places will know that light can live inside fear." Jacob kissed the top of her head and whispered that the story was already written in the way they breathed and cooked and walked and noticed the way sunlight lands on a glass of water. He turned off the lamp and listened to the city settling into its night songs. The future was still a wide river with hidden currents, but he no longer felt like he was standing on separate shores from anyone he loved. He felt like he was in the boat, oars in hand, the two of them rowing together toward every ordinary morning that waited to be cherished. And somewhere deep inside the healed body of a brave child, an ovary glowed like a small stubborn star, a reminder that even the quietest parts of us know how to come back to life.